Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for joining us for today's training on mandatory reporting. We have two presenters today, Michelle and Rhonda. One is from Adult Aging Services and Children and Family Services. Sorry. So thank you again for joining us today. Also, just a couple of reminders for anybody that might be hopping on for the first time. Please keep your microphones off and your cameras off during today's presentation. Also, if you are needing a certificate of participation, please put your first and last name as well as email in the chat box at the very end of today's presentation, and we will get a certificate mailed out to you. Also, next week's presentation is fair housing, as we had to reschedule that due to the massive blizzard. So next week's presentation will be fair housing with Department of Labor. But I will hand it over to, we'll start with Michelle, and then we will go on to Rhonda. And then if anyone has questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to the presenter as we go along. Thank you. Michelle, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, and I was going to start sharing my screen and then it blocked you, so I couldn't see to share my screen anymore. So I'm going to start, then I'll get it into presenter mode here, so bear with me 1 second. Okay, hopefully you're seeing my screen. And I need to, it's switched, of course, on me. Good Lord. Yesterday worked fine, so now we're going to play, because you're seeing both the slide and the next slide, weren't you?
Yes. It was
Yeah, of course.
In that presenter mode or whatever.
Yep. Sorry. Yesterday, of course, it went smoothly. And then, of course, now today it's going to fight me. So let me try this again. Okay. Now we should be on the right side. Okay. So we're going to talk about vulnerable adult protective services, or VAPS, as it's commonly.
Michelle, I can't see your screen.
Oh, for goodness sakes. Seriously. Oh, because I didn't hit the button. So let's try that again. And now you're seeing that side, right?
Yep, we see like a back.
Yeah, it'll be
there we
fine.
go.
There we go. Okay. This time, I promise it's not going to be this bad the whole time. So vulnerable adult protective services, or VAPS as it's commonly known, addresses the safety of vulnerable adults who are at risk of harm due to the presence or threat of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, or self-neglect. And that's one of our common reports. Self-neglect is our highest report. We offer this program statewide through Adult and Aging Services Division or through local partner agencies. But again, it's a state-run program. We do have a couple contracts with zone offices, but it all comes through the state. So who do we serve? We serve adults age 18 or older who have a substantial mental or functional impairment that inhibits their ability to live independently. So I'm not asking reporters to make that determination and say this person definitely meets the definition of vulnerable. I'm saying something seems wrong. In my gut, I feel something's wrong, and this person seems to me to be vulnerable. I would say at that point, a report should be filed. Even if intake staff say right now they don't meet our definition of vulnerable, we have a paper trail that will help us as we move toward, what if something changes in the future, we have this documentation from the report. So that's what I always say. If you see something, say something. If you're concerned about someone, please file a report. It does not hurt us to get that report. So here's the definitions, kind of what we have in Century Code. So abuse is any willful act or omission by a caregiver or someone else that results in a physical injury, mental anguish, confinement, and then we include sexual abuse or exploitation and financial exploitation under this definition. So it's kind of our catch-all. Neglect is the failure of a caregiver to provide those services necessary to keep someone safe and healthy. Self-neglect, on the other hand, is like my own inability to take care of my own needs or my lack of desire to do so. And I think that's why self-neglect is so hard. I may know the resources or services that could help me, but I don't want to, or I'm not seeking them out. And then financial exploitation is the use or receipt of services provided by the vulnerable adult without paying them justly, or misappropriation, misuse of funds, property, or assets. It can happen by undue influence, but it's usually, all of these usually happen at the hands of someone they know love and trust, someone that is known to them, is most commonly the perpetrator for adult protective services. So what are we looking for, or what could a reporter look for? What would they see? So abuse kind of has both of those categories, or all of those categories under it. But with abuse, you're going to note physical abuse. So like the hitting, the bruising, the slapping. They may have marks around their throat. You may see marks on their arms from being held, those kind of things. So kind of typical what you're thinking of with physical abuse. And then the sexual abuse kind of has three categories. So it could be hands-on offenses where the kissing or the touching or the penetration. I think that's what most people think of when they think of sexual abuse. Hands-off offenses would be forcing an older adult or a vulnerable adult to watch pornography, taking pictures of them in state of undress. That would be typical hands-off offenses. And then harmful genital practices would be a care provider really focusing on those areas of the body, so the penis or the vagina or things like that, to insert creams, or really focusing on those in the bathing area, and then causing, of course, some issues for that older adult or the vulnerable adult. Neglect and self-neglect, again, so it's the refusal or failure to provide care, or my own ability to provide care for myself. And then you might see things like inadequate food, maybe not getting enough water. And those are two things that really, really impact a person's brain health, right? And so one of the common things that we, when we present with the Alzheimer's Association, really getting adequate nutrition and hydration is important to keep that brain kind of functioning throughout the day. And so when people don't have those things, it can impact their cognitive abilities as they navigate the day. It could be shelter. So hoarding is a huge one, especially under the self-neglect. You may also see that in neglect where there's a caregiver in the home, and the home is also hoarded. It could be that the home is falling down around their ears, kind of not in a good state of repair. It could be lack of medical care. So medical care is very expensive. And if I'm neglecting that older adult, I may not want to take them into the doctor. First of all, they might see what's actually happening to this older adult, but also then I don't want to pay for those services for the older adult or for the vulnerable adult. The other thing that we kind of see here is like lack of, personal cares. So toenails that have kind of grown in underneath the foot, like into the toe on the bottom. We've had reports on that. Hair that's not being washed. We've had reports where a person has an ulcer or decubitus ulcer or bed sore. And it was actually impacted or infected to the point where there were maggots in the wound. And so that was obviously a lack of good care at the hands of her provider. Go ahead. Okay. I thought there was a question, sorry. With exploitation, again, it's the illegal or improper use of funds, property, or assets. So knowing that we live in North Dakota, it could be land royalties, oil royalties. We see a lot of those. And it can happen through theft, coercion, fraud, abuse of their legal authority. So if they're a power of attorney or a guardian and they're not using the funds to care for the vulnerable adult, that could be a type of exploitation. And then, of course, scams. And we're all familiar kind of with scams. We hear about those all the time. So I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm going to show just part of this first video. And it talks about neglect. And the reason I have a video on neglect is because it's really hard for law enforcement or people to prove neglect because they're saying something didn't happen. So there was a caregiver established. They said they could provide the care, but obviously they're not providing the care. And again, I'm only going to show the first part of it. I'm going to give you a warning, though. It is pretty graphic. So if you need to look away, please do so. But I'm going to click it and hopefully the sound will work here. Oh, for pity's sake. Well, that of course worked yesterday. I will go on then, and I'll just do a different video here. Always fun. Who can report? Mandatory reporters. So sorry, I have a dog behind me. Those are any medical or mental health professionals who are providing care or services to a vulnerable adult or someone who knows that a vulnerable adult has been subjected to abuse, neglect, or exploitation. There is quite a list of mandatory reporters in our law, and it matches similar to child protective services, but we do have things like qualified individuals who are bankers that may deal with lots and lots of money, banks in and of themselves are not mandatory reporters, but it is those qualified individuals like a broker, agent, or dealer that deals with more money than what you typically see. But anyone can call with a concern, including a friend, relative, neighbor, banker, or other concerned community member, which is where you guys would fall. And I'm guessing you see a lot of the things that I was talking about when I was talking about what you might see with a self-neglecting person with the hoarded home. Sometimes there's lots of animals in that home, just not taking care of themselves properly. So how do you report? It's really, really important to know that we're not an emergency service. So Vulnerable Adult Protective Services, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So if someone is in immediate danger, law enforcement should be called first, and then the report should be filed to Vulnerable Adult Protective Services. What I tell people is don't assume that the law enforcement's going to file, or, you know, if an ambulance comes that they're going to file. Everyone should be filing because everyone has a different view on the situation and they see things so differently. It's really helpful to us to get all of that information on the person and or how they're living. And you might have eyes on the home or have been in the home and could provide that information to us. That would be super helpful to us as we're going in. It's really important for workers to know what type of environment they're walking into. And so our intake staff do ask questions about the state of the home, if there are any animals that we should be aware of, because not all animals are friendly, as you all know. And then if we should be aware of like other people living in the home, or are there weapons in the home that we should know about as we're walking in unannounced. So you can file online, and that's the link, and it should work. And our reporting form, and I did put something in the chat that has all of these links in it. That should be a really easy thing for you to keep on hand for reporting purposes. And then we have an email that you can email reports to. We have a fax number. And then at the very bottom, we have our phone number. I have 3 intake staff. And so those intake staff are super busy all the time. And so if you call in by phone and try to leave a message, they're never able to answer because they're always talking to someone else. So you leave a message, they return your call, you're busy, they can't reach you, you leave another message, and we've just gone around in a circle and we're delaying getting a staff member out to that home. And so we really encourage community members, professionals, to use either the online reporting option or our 1607 reporting form. And both of those submit directly to our system, so it's very handy for you and for us. The reporting form, you can type in it and you can hit submit at the bottom and it'll send it through an email system. So it's very, very handy to get that report in.
Michelle, there's a quick question.
Sure.
Do you have any brochures that we can get concerning this?
Yeah, I could actually print some out, and I can give you the link to our webpage too. We're just updating our frequently asked questions, but that link that I put in chat is super handy to have. Just for how, like, walking someone through where should they call, what are the needs of the individual, and who should they be reporting to. Are there other fact sheets that you're looking for that I could point you to, or would that be sufficient, the one that's in the chat?
I'm thinking that would probably be sufficient to start off with. We have people from all over the state, so
Okay.
It'd probably be easiest for them to probably just go to your website, correct?
Yeah, and when I'm done sharing my screen, I will put that link in the chat for people, and know that our website is being updated within the next few months. And so we're hoping directly on our website to put that flow chart that I sent in the chat right on our webpage, because it's really helpful for people not to have to read a whole bunch and just say, I know this about the person, this is what I'm looking for, should I call this number or should I call VAPS, and kind of walks them through kind of a decision-making process. And so hopefully that would be helpful.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea of what our report volume is, we took last year, so this is through 2021, we took almost 2,500 reports, which is huge for us. When I took over this job way back in 2011, we were getting 600 a year. And every year since we instituted mandatory reporting, our numbers have increased. And I expect the same for this year. I expect we'll be over 2,500. And then those reports, if they are screened in for an investigation, meaning they go out to a regional staff member that is required to do the home visit to go out and assess the situation, of those almost 2,500 reports, 1,485 of those turned into an investigation. And we have 17 staff statewide that do the investigation process. And when reports come in, they may list one thing like, I suspect neglect is happening. And once the investigators go out to the home, they find that more than one thing is happening. So neglect and exploitation are occurring, or it's self-neglect, and maybe they're also being exploited, and that's why they're self-neglecting. And so our allegations may come in as one thing, but as we go through the investigation, our allegations are always higher than our investigations. And so we had 1,666 allegations, and we substantiated saying, yes, it's more likely true than not that this report, the abuse actually happened. And so we're really getting good numbers. Our most common allegation is self-neglect, like I said, and you can see on our chart how our numbers have risen as they go through the years. And self-neglect is, again, always the highest report that we receive. And since 2013, self-neglect and exploitation increased by more than 200%, substantiated. So it tells me we're getting really good reports, and we're getting really good information, and we're getting out there into the homes and making those determinations.
There's another question.
Sure.
Would it be appropriate to report a call with a client who seems to be experiencing dementia or similar? Is it correct that that person then needs to opt in for services?
So there's kind of a gray area. So I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. And if that person has further follow-up questions, please let me know. So adults have the right to live as they want to live unless somebody takes that right away. And the person or the entity that kind of take those rights away is the court system. I would say absolutely, if you're concerned that you had a call with someone that's renting from you or a resident, and you say, I don't believe this person was tracking, I'm really concerned about their cognition, which also then makes me concerned about their ability to care for themselves. Yes, please file that report. We do try to do like brief cognitive testing because that gives us an idea if we should try to work with their doctor to get further testing and see if there's maybe further things that could be put into place. Like, do they have a power of attorney document? And would that person now be able to step up and help make decisions? But yes, if they retain their rights, and I'm going to get to this on the next screen after this one, they can tell us to pound sand when we come out to their home and say, I want nothing that you have to offer. But I would then say to you, please, 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 if you feel like Vulnerable Adult Protective Services did nothing, which often is what we hear, it's because we're working with adults, and adults have the right to say no, unless something, is serious enough that we can do guardianship or something like that. But they do have the right to say no, and they can refuse services, absolutely, if they're able to do so. Okay, so when you call in or you file a report with Vulnerable Adult Protective Services, the central intake staff, they're going to reach out and they kind of review the concern that you sent in, and then they're going to reach out to the reporter if they can make contact and ask our screening questions. We really want to make sure that we know what kind of danger they're in. If they're in danger, do they need immediate intervention? Do we have to do a welfare check? Is that something that we need to think about doing? And then really making the determination if they're vulnerable or not, and if abuse, neglect, and exploitation is occurring. If they don't meet the definition of vulnerable, or it's more the situation is handled by a different entity like protection and advocacy, then we would make sure that we connect those individuals to services and make appropriate referrals. So we're not going to say we're not it and not give you anything to suggest, right? So we'll give some options and give referrals to individuals. So, we get calls, I need to get a power of attorney established. Well, let me refer you to Legal Services of North Dakota. They can help with that. So those are the kind of things. We're not going to just say not it. If we need to refer it on to protection and advocacy or Department of Health, we will make that referral too. If it meets the criteria for further evaluation, then we sent that to our regional staff, and they then start their home visit protocol, do that full assessment, and make referrals and work with that adult to get services connected in the home. So just really briefly, what else should you know after you report? Again, I'm back to decision-making rights. It's not like Child Protective Services. We can't go in and take an adult out of the home, right? And I'm really generalizing. So I know Rhonda's probably like, don't say it like that. But I'm really generalizing. We can't just force somebody to move out of their home. We really go in there and say, we've had a report of concern. Here's services I can offer to you to bring into your home to help you connect with. And then they get to say yes or no to those services, unless the court takes away that right. So, right, if someone has said they cannot make their decisions and the court has established a decision maker, then we work with that decision maker. Living environment, a vulnerable adult has a right to live how they want to live if it doesn't involve crime or harm someone else. And harm is really, people are like, well, they're harming me because they're spending my inheritance. Not really harm, right? So we have a lot of conversations like that. We can institute protective arrangements. So if we get medical evidence, questioning capacity, if there's nothing established, like if the person hasn't established a power of attorney that can take over and help with decision making, we can take appropriate steps like looking to guardianship to ensure their safety. We always want to do the least restrictive intervention possible. We want to preserve their independence. We want to make sure they get the services in the home. We don't want to do placement in a nursing home. And I'm sure you've kind of heard that coming through the state, where we're working with the Department of Justice to really focus on providing services in homes and in communities so adults can stay in their home and community longer.
There's a question.
Sure.
If I have a client who is elderly and is not really taking care of him or herself, would that be a good reason to call? I think, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I have one in particular that he urinates on himself, so he always smells, as does his apartment. Someone is supposed to be going in there daily, but I did not see anyone there when I was with him for over an hour during the day.
I would absolutely file that report so we can get in there and get eyes on the situation and find out who is supposed to be in there providing care, and maybe if we can partner like with the care provider to get more care in the home. Absolutely would file that report.
And then, is a landlord a mandatory reporter?
Not technically under law. I would just encourage you as a concerned citizen basically to file that report. It doesn't specifically say landlords, but it talks about medical or mental health professionals and really lists those. We do get quite a few reports from landlords, but they're not our highest reporter. But I think you guys have eyes on situations that we maybe don't know about that would probably be really beneficial for us to know. And I know it kind of gets scary. I heard that last week. I was doing a presentation and someone said I was really scared to report because I think that's going to get somebody in trouble. That's not what's going to happen, right? We're wanting to work with that person, get services in place. We don't want to just stick them in a nursing home, right? That's not our goal. We want to make sure that we can keep them home. We want to make sure that they're getting the care that they need in their home or wherever they want to receive that care. And I'm going to, hopefully this one will work. This video should. This is just, it's going to start with a 30-second ad, but then the staff members, so some of my intake staff and some of my investigators are just going to talk a little bit more about the program. Are you kidding me right now? Okay, I'm going to do this. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen because that worked yesterday too, but I'm just going to bear with me. I'm going to pull it up because this is a really important video. And they can attest to the fact that these worked, you guys. I swear to God, these videos worked yesterday. So now today they're just fighting me. It'll take me 2 more seconds to get to where I want to go.
COVID has made it harder to see adults who may be vulnerable to abuse
or exploitation. Mental and physical reasons make it harder for us to protect ourselves.
Yep, you were hearing it, but you weren't seeing it.
COVID has made it harder to see adults who may be vulnerable to abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Mental and physical reasons make it harder for us to protect ourselves. We need you to see us and to speak up for us. Make it your business. If it's an emergency, call 911. Otherwise, report concerns to Vulnerable Adult Protective Services at nd.gov/DHS.
We see anybody that is 18 and over, but vulnerable adults are so many different kinds of people that would qualify as vulnerable, that would meet that definition. But it would be anybody that needs assistance, really, in doing daily cares. May that be grocery shopping, difficulty with medications, difficulty taking care of themselves daily, getting to the doctor's office.
Somebody that has a cognitive or functional impairment that prohibits their ability to live independently, that's inhibiting their ability to understand, their situation and understand that they might be getting exploited, abused, or neglected because they can't identify it. First and most obvious is signs of physical abuse, whether it be like bruising or marks on the physical body. There's emotional abuse, using manipulation tactics to force a person to stay in a particular environment can be considered a form of abuse. There's financial abuse, or exploitation as we call it, which is basically when people extort somebody for their resources or things that they have and they think that they are entitled to. The group of people that we look to serve, are people that can't even make that phone call. They can't reach out. They don't know that we're there. They can't understand that they have people in their corner to walk them through that. They don't know that we exist. They don't know that services are available to them as long as we can get the appropriate people involved.
There are a variety of ways to submit a report. The best way to submit a report is go to our North Dakota State website and then go to the reporting form and then report that way through our web intake. That gets the information to our intake workers the fastest.
If you do believe that somebody's in an emergent situation and they need protective services right away, we encourage a call to law enforcement.
And if it's an emergency that doesn't require 911 but requires us to see clients as soon as possible, that can get us to see the client sooner than a phone call.
Then it's our job to investigate further or to determine what investigation is needed. Sometimes the reports can be malicious. Sometimes they're just friendly neighbors who have concerns, and it's kind of up to us then to determine what needs to be done, what follow-up we need to do, what referrals we can make. And everything is led by the individual. So they have the right to self-determination. And if they don't want our help or want services, they have the right to make that choice. And if we can't do something the first time, or if it's not enough, it at least builds a case.
Anytime you get that gut feeling that something just doesn't feel or look right, we encourage people to reach out and at least have a conversation. By filing a report, it opens the door for us to be able to have a conversation.
I hear from clients quite a bit, this is incredibly embarrassing, and they apologize profusely. I'm so sorry that you're here. I didn't think anything was wrong. Am I in trouble? But ultimately, we have to bring it back to the vulnerable adult. We have to make sure they're safe, they're physically safe, financially, and they have everything they need to continue to be successful.
I don't go there with the intent of getting anybody in trouble. We go there with the intent of help. But if necessary, we'll make those calls and let them do then what they need to do.
Nobody wants to be vulnerable. Nobody wants to be termed that way, but really it's to assist with services to see how we can help them. And maybe we can help them with services to be more independent, so they may not see themselves as vulnerable anymore.
Some people are very proud and don't want that help, or think that they can do everything on their own, or don't realize the things that they can't do. Some people don't realize how much better their situation can be because it's always been a certain way.
I'm a very big advocate for our clients' rights. People have a right to make decisions to live exactly how they want to, despite how other people may feel about that.
I think that my job is to fix it, and we can't always fix things. They sometimes don't want to fix it, but at least I tried and, gave them the options and offered them what's available.
I think people's misperceptions regarding vulnerable adult protective services is that we have a lot more power than we actually do, and that we have the ability to just pull someone out of their home and place them out of the community, out of society, and place them into a nursing home or a different level of care. My job entails meeting people where they're at, especially if they have that ability to continue to make their own decisions.
So since North Dakota is a little bit more rural, that tends to be just naturally more to yourself. People tend to be more private with their information, maybe some of the trials that they are going through personally.
Well, I think one thing that I always think about too is, it's another misconception, is that people think that once a vulnerable adult report is made, is that Adult Protective Services is going to be the end all and fix all. But really, it takes everyone, sometimes in the community, to help remedy or get someone safe or prevent something else from happening.
We're out there to help. And so if you see something, it might seem odd to make a call or to report, but we can't help if we don't know. We won't go out and do a visit if we don't know that there's anything wrong. So best bet is to make that call. It's not hard. And then we'll take it from there.
You know, if you see something, to say something. If you have that feeling that something is just not right and somebody's being subject to something that they should not be, you know, it's better off to reach out, because not only are you protecting that person's dignity, you know, you're also getting the right people in place to help prevent that from happening again.
So that's kind of it for me. I do want to say that all reports are confidential. All reporters are confidential. And so if you're making that report, we cannot tell anyone who made that report unless we're ordered in a court of law to do so. But really, when we go out, people are like, who filed this report? We have to tell them we cannot tell. But we're just here to provide services, right? We're here to link you to services. That doesn't mean that they're not going to jump to conclusions, but just know that we do not release that information. We do not tell anyone who filed that report. Everything is confidential. And I do see the question about reservation. So we have memorandum of understanding in place with 2 of the reservations currently, and those are the reservations up in the Devil's Lake area, so Spirit Lake and Turtle Mountain. However, they are both actively working towards establishing their own elder protection team. Standing Rock has their own elder protection team, and then Newtown actually has established their own, but we do partner with them at times if needed. And for sure, as Spirit Lake and Turtle Mountain are moving towards establishing their own teams, we are still working together on those 2 reservations to help them as they navigate the reports coming in and working with vulnerable adults.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michelle, for presenting and the information. And then when you get a chance, if you could just put those links in the chat box for everybody, that would be great.
And thank you for being patient with the technology, Kylie. I know it worked yesterday, so thank you again.
It did work yesterday, so I can attest to that. Oh, there's one more question. Is there any help to recover money after an elderly person has been scammed online? I know that AARP has trainings to help adults recognize scams, but what if they have been scammed?
Yeah, and that's really, really tough. There really isn't any way. I mean, we've had some successful cases in the state of North Dakota, but you know, oftentimes they're never going to get that money back. We do currently, it's very exciting. We had federal funds come in for vulnerable adult protective services for the first time ever during COVID, and we were able to establish a forensic accounting contract. And so not just to scams, but to financial exploitation, where they can do a deep dive on those records, that they can give us back a report that we can hopefully take to law enforcement to get some charges pressed. And I actually had a meeting yesterday with the U.S. attorney and talked about how can they move forward with elder justice cases to help us more in North Dakota set some precedent that people stealing from their loved ones isn't just a civil matter. It's a theft is a theft. And so, yeah, I don't have a good answer on the scams, but it is a sad situation for sure. And thank you. Yeah, my dogs have a lot to say, so I apologize for them trying to sneak in too, but I appreciate you guys spending time with me today.
Thank you. We will move on to Rhonda.
Hi, thanks for having me today. Let me see if I can share my screen. I am a field service specialist for child protection through Children and Family Services. Okay, now my screen's doing the double thing too, and it didn't earlier.
It looks normal on this end.
Oh, does it? Okay, yep. Then I will just move forward with the mandatory reporter training for child abuse and neglect. There's different types of child abuse and neglect to report. Physical neglect would include your environmental conditions, like the condition of the home, inadequate clothing or hygiene, nutritional neglect, inadequate supervision, medical neglect, and educational neglect. Some specifics regarding environmental conditions. Neglect may exist when an environmental condition is such that it is harmful or potentially harmful to the children. There are many factors that may be present in a particular environment that pose potential health and safety hazards for children in that environment. Some examples of those include lack of food or clean water, spoiled food that is potentially accessible to the child, inadequate sewage disposal such as feces, urine, and these can be human or animal waste, overflowing garbages, dirty dishes, rotting food or formula, toilets not in working condition, alcohol or other drugs, whether they're legal, illegal, prescriptions, over the counter, paraphernalia would be included in that are unsecured or within a child's reach, lead paint, leaking gas or toxic fumes, other toxic materials that is potentially accessible to a child. Unsecured or accessible sharp objects such as knives, tools, scissors, hammers. Those are examples of things we often see in homes. Broken or missing windows, broken glass, or other potentially objects that could injure a child. Choking or suffocating hazards, such as plastic bags, blinds, cords, small objects that could be ingested, unsafe environment for infants to sleep in, including blankets, pillows, or other objects. These could be choking or suffocation hazards. Drowning hazards, such as unsecured or unsupervised bathtubs, hot tubs, pools, ponds, stock tanks, deep buckets, etc. Some other examples of environmental conditions would include falling hazards, stairs, steps, balconies, windows, window wells, if there's construction or excavation going on. Presence of sick, injured, or dangerous animals, infestations of insects or vermin, presence of criminal or gang activity, drug manufacturing or delivery, drug paraphernalia, drug delivery devices such as needles, smoking, snorting materials, firearms or other weapons, which would include BB guns, aircraft guns, knives, switchblades, arrows, etc. Loaded, unsecured, or accessible to children. Poisonous household products, your cleaning products, beauty products, paints, stains, things like that that are accessible to the children. Fire hazards such as exposed electrical wires, open fireplaces, things like that. External locks or locking devices on bedroom doors and bathroom doors. Power tools, vehicles, farm equipment, things that would be accessible to a child to get into. Abandoned appliances and vehicles. Concerns of inadequate supervision, where the caregivers are present but physically or mentally impaired to such an extent that they are unable to provide supervision or response to the needs of the child or children. Some examples of a caregiver is present but inadequately supervises the child. The caregiver is with the child but is unable or unwilling to supervise. They could be impaired by substances, distracted by other activities going on, or if they're sleeping during the day when the child's awake, or the parent has inadequate knowledge or skills. Another example of a caregiver fails to arrange safe substitute care for the child when they're going to be gone. Or a child is repeatedly left in the custody of others for days or weeks at a time. This could be due to unwillingness of the parent or the caregiver to provide or maintain care for the child. This practice is sometimes referred to as shuttling, as the child is shuttled from one caregiver to another's home, and causes some instability for the child.
We do have a question.
Okay.
Is mold an issue for children that can be reportable?
Mold can be reportable, and we'd look at, is it having a negative health effect for the child? And what are the caregivers doing to try and remedy the situation of mold?
Is there an age limit? What if a child is 16 or 17 and is left alone to live by himself and mom and or dad live 3 hours away?
We look at anything for us children are 18, younger than 18. So anything below 18 is reportable. And the expectation is that the parents are providing care, supervision, meeting that child's needs. So that would be something that's reportable. There's different examples. We kind of break down our inadequate supervision by age group. Younger children like 0 to 4 need more supervision than others. So we look at when they're outdoors, they should always be in view of the caregiver. And the caregiver must be able to respond immediately. Children should not be left alone in a vehicle for more than a brief period of time. If left alone, the child should be in direct view of the caregiver at all times and should be in restraints. An example of this would be if you're at the gas station and going to pay for your gas, you want to be able to see the vehicle at all times. Indoors, a caregiver should be available and able to respond and provide immediate care and protection from harm. And then there's other guidelines for children 0 to 17. Children 8 years of age or under should be supervised at all times with a caregiver available, and an 8-year-old should not supervise other children. Children who are 9 years old should not be left unsupervised for periods greater than 2 hours during the daytime. This age child should not be unsupervised at night and should not supervise other children. Children who are 10 and 11 years old may be left alone for longer periods of time. However, caution is advised in leaving children unsupervised during sleeping hours. Children in this age group should not supervise other children. When a child's 12 years of age, they may be permitted to act as babysitters. It is recommended that they successfully complete an approved child care training course. That's a recommendation, not a requirement. Caution should always be advised on number of children left in care, the length of time for the caregiving, and any special needs of the children that they're caring for. Children under 15 years of age should not be left unattended overnight. Caution should be taken when leaving 15 to 17-year-olds alone overnight, or extended absences of caregivers are not recommended. Caregivers are expected to adhere to supervision requirements of public facilities, such as video arcades, drop-in centers, pools, etc. Examples of inadequate clothing and hygiene is the failure to provide clothing adequate for the weather, winter coats, hats, gloves. And then when a child's lack of cleanliness has caused the child to be offensive to others, made fun of, teased, bullied, due to their odor or cleanliness. If a child's clothing or themselves are infested with lice, fleas, etc., and goes untreated, even when provided with information or medication to relieve the problem. There is identified risk of harm to the child as a result of the clothing or wrapping used, such as is it a choking hazard? Hygiene issues which cause risk of escalation or complication of another condition, such as lack of dental care, can cause a tooth infection, or the cleanliness contributes to an infection of an open sore or wound. Some example of physical abuse that's under the North Dakota Century Code. Excuse me. Physical abuse would be willfully inflicts or allows to be inflicted upon the child. Mental injury, bodily injury, substantial bodily injuries such as bruises, swelling of the lips, tongues, sprains, strains, or serious bodily injury, fractures, burns, skulls, loss of teeth, unconsciousness, extreme pain, injury that causes permanent impairment, brain or neurological damage, kind of separate out the different types of bodily injury there. We went to, in North Dakota, a central intake reporting line about a year ago, rather than doing it by the area, that the counties. And it's a free statewide toll-free child abuse and neglect reporting line. Anyone who suspects child abuse or neglect in North Dakota can call that number, 833-958-3500, to report concerns. If it's an immediate danger, then they should call 911. And this line is answered by specialized child protection service intake workers and supervisors who live and work across the state. Calls are answered from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time and 7 to 4 Mountain Time, Monday through Friday. If it's after those hours, each county zone in the state of North Dakota has a local number that can be called for immediate assistance, as there's workers on call 24 hours a day. Any questions? I feel like I whipped through that really fast. I'll add, in the state of North Dakota, mandated reporters, I often refer to them as working in those caregiving fields, doctors, nurses, teachers, childcare providers are some examples. Otherwise, the whole community is encouraged to report anytime they have concerns of a child abuse or neglect. Reporters' information is confidential, similar to adult protective services. And under law, it's confidential and not given out unless ordered by a judge to release that information. That is some examples of what's reportable for abuse and neglect.
Are there any questions, comments, or concerns anybody has? For either Rhonda or Michelle? There's one that came in. Because of the opioid crisis, I understand that there are a number of grandparents caring for grandkids when their child, the parent, is incarcerated or in treatment. I know a woman who was caring for her 3 grandkids, ages 12, 11, and 8. She tried everything and got virtually no support from anyone. The eldest boy refused to go to school. He refused to shower. He was bigger than she and could get violent. Why isn't there more help?
I know from working within the child protection system, and there might be more advice from adult protective services. I'm not sure if it falls under that, but we would look at that as a legal matter where the grandmother should be calling the police when she's scared of him, when he's acting out. A report could be absolutely be filed with child protection services, and we'd look at it as that child's needs are more than what the care provider is able to provide to them, and could look at assisting with getting some services in there for that caregiver.
And I think too, we're just learning that there's a grandkid or kinship kind of network that's establishing here in North Dakota that might be beneficial to this woman, or could have been maybe beneficial. But it's very hard, right? I mean, I think they're taking on that extra burden, and then they're afraid. And then what we see with adult protective services is that they don't want to have the person get in trouble, right? Like, I don't know if that was the case in this one where she didn't want her grandchild to get in trouble, but there are those kind of barriers too that we run into with adult protective services. But I don't know if the kinship network would have helped her, you know, to connect to services, to connect to other family members, to help find a way around the situation. We also have a lifespan respite care grant where there are monies to help get some respite in that home. So if grandma's like, I can't, something's going to happen, or my health is failing, or I just need a moment away to myself, there are some funds that possibly she could have someone come in and provide respite for her to help with some of those needs. And so there are lots of things that could be connected to for aging services. I would say for sure, you know, what Rhonda said, but also if she was looking for services for herself, she could call the ADRL line, or Aging and Disability Resource Link. It's the same number as reporting for Vulnerable Adult Protective Services, but it's the option 1, and maybe they could help connect her to services too. I don't know. Oh goodness, that sounds like a really tough situation with the Nintendo, and I'm sure she felt really like she was left alone. That's sad.
Well, and I'll just add, I always encourage file a report with Child Protection Services, because most of the time a worker will go in and try to connect services with the family. Our goal is to keep children with their family, and if not with their parents and with extended family members, and to try and provide those services before they need to be removed from the home. So, I mean, that's what we would look at doing, seeing what services are available and the family could engage in.
There was a follow-up to that question. It just states that the school resource counselor came and insisted grandma take the Nintendo thing away. Then the counselor left and left her with the kid and the Nintendo. Michelle, can you speak some more about an adult living in a hoarding situation?
Sure. So it's very, very difficult. So, you know, we've had cases where we've been referred several times to work with an adult who lives in a hoarded situation. What my experience has been is that if the home could be falling down around their ears, but if it still has running water, it's not, public health wouldn't condemn the home. And so really what we try to do is build a rapport with that individual, and try to help get services in place. If there's services that could link to, that could help with cleaning, if they're willing to clean, that would be something that we could do. We also have an emergency fund that we can use for Vulnerable Adult Protective Services clients or people that we're serving, for vulnerable adults, that we could help with some of the cleaning if that's what they desired. But it's very, very hard. They've often lived that way their whole life, and that's how they're used to living, and that's how they prefer to live. But my prime example was a small town, and we've been referred several times over to this woman. And it was probably her third hoarded home, and the prior two had been condemned. And we'd go out and we'd offer services, and we'd say, how can I connect you? She'd say, give me the numbers, I'll take them, I'll do whatever I need to do. And then 6 months later, we'd be right back in the same situation because she couldn't or didn't want to follow through. And it happened in the wintertime that I went there and met with her, and she, you know, of course, was living with a space heater and not safe at all. And at that point, she was ready. She was like, okay, I'm ready to go. Where do you want me to go? And then we had to scramble because, okay, we have animals to take care of, but it's a very difficult situation, and there's not a lot of like code enforcement with that either. So it's really building that relationship with that adult and trying to work with them to see if we can, you know, help with the cleaning or help them to find a way through the cleaning. And kind of referencing that video, you know, it's very embarrassing. A lot of them, you know, maybe felt like they just started really small and all of a sudden it exploded. Right? It just snowballed over time, and they're so ashamed. Like, I don't want you seeing my home this way. And so how do we, you know, kind of break down that barrier and really work with them and just be compassionate and just say, it's okay, right? We're here to help you. How can we help you? And so I don't know if that's the answer that you're looking for, but hoarding is very, very hard. You know, if you talk to people that work with individuals that hoard, there's some mental health stuff sometimes that's going on, and there's a kind of a backstory behind that. But again, often it's just started small and it's snowballed, and now we're in the state that we're in. And it's not always just garbage, right? It can also be like purchasing things. So, I have a family member that they like to shop, and their home is fully hoarded of brand new items that they're not using, right? And so it crosses age span, it crosses economic spans. It's a very difficult situation.
Next question. You reference providing services. What services are offered through CPS, or to where are you referring parents?
Through Child Protection Services, referrals can be made for in-home case management services right through the zones, where a social worker comes into the house and works with the family on plans or lets them know of other services in the community, parenting education, things like that, right through the zones. Some examples of places we can refer families to, depending on the needs or what's found out throughout the assessment. It might be to the village to do some family counseling. There's an in-home program through there where somebody comes right into the home and works with the whole family, depending on what it is. It might be the kinship program that was referenced earlier, if it's family members caring for children. Lots of different counseling services. Some of it depends on the community. In the rural areas, those services aren't as available as they are in our more populated areas. Sometimes we're able to tap into some daycare funding grants where the children, depending on ages, can go to daycare to give the caregiver that respite care that's needed.
And then there's another follow-up to the grandparent situation. It's still going on. She asked for help from Child Protection. The kids were moved to the other grandparent's house, who claimed them all on his taxes. Now she has 2 kids back. Now the girl is cutting and she's 12 years old.
I'm not familiar with whatever case you're referencing, and due to confidentiality, I wouldn't be able to give any specifics anyway. What I can say is often what people say occurred might be different than what did. And if concerns are coming up again, file a report. As far as a child cutting, that's when we do some referrals for mental health services for that child, and see if there's respite programs for the caregiver that we can tap into, or any other services for that caregiver specifically too.
What is needed to get case management services involved, or how does that process start?
That's kind of difficult to answer specifically, just because, again, each case assessment is so different. In North Dakota, Child Protection, well, all of Child Welfare recently switched to what we call safety framework, the safety framework practice model. So we're really looking at those safety concerns within a family. And then, of course, each county is a little different as to what they'll accept for referrals for in-home case management. And again, in your larger areas, if you don't qualify for someone from the county to come in and assist, then we could look at referrals through other places, such as, Solutions in the Fargo area offers some in-home case management. Sometimes your community actions offers some things like that. As far as through the zone or the county, we really look at what safety concerns there are, and is there any immediate dangers or impending dangers within the family unit. Not sure if I answered how it started, but how it starts, but it really starts through filing that child protection report.
All right. Well, our time is up. Thank you again, Rhonda and Michelle, for taking time out of your schedules to present to us. Again, thank you for everybody attending today's session. If you could please if you need a certificate, please put your first and last name as well as your email address in the chat box. I will leave it open for another 5 minutes. So get that information in there so that we can get those certificates out to you. Again, thank you for attending today's session. And next week we have Fair Housing with Department of Labor. Have a good rest of the week.